You're listening to the Parents of Hardworking Teens podcast, episode 93. How assessment is decided on, written, and created, and why knowing and understanding this process is super useful when it comes to your teen completing any kind of assessment, formal or otherwise, so they do it smoothly and successfully. I'm Katie Jones, and with over 15 years in education as an award-winning high school teacher, international external examiner, and as a study coach, I've helped thousands of students skyrocket their results and confidence. And this podcast is where I share all my insights, tactics, and tips with you, the parent, so you can help your hardworking teen get happy, smart, and successful in their study, and have you both enjoy the journey along the way. This is the Parents of Hardworking Teens podcast. Hey there, very important parents and carers. How are you? I am doing good, and I am so pleased to have the Easter holidays here right now. Because first world problem for sure, but I had actually kind of expected to be moving house right about now. My husband and I have had our eye on a little complex for a while. And when I say a while, I'm talking a couple of years. And a place finally came up. It was unexpected, but we were in a really good position with things. And then 2 words. Well, actually, it's 4 words. Cash buyer and buyer's agent, who swooped in, I tell you. No further offers were taken, and we are back to square one. So I have been licking my wounds a little bit with that, but I am gradually turning disappointment into determination. And I am determined to use this extra time now to get to work and get rock solid study, making some big moves instead of us moving. Part of that is the 100th episode that we have coming up of this podcast in May, and I'm going to be inviting you to get involved with shaping that soon so you can make it as useful to you and your teen as possible. Plus, I have a couple of other things up my sleeve that I am not quite ready to share yet, but as with everything, if you are on my email list, then you will definitely hear about that coming up in the next few months. But today, I'm going to be taking you behind the curtain of assignments and essays and every other type of what we'll call formal assessment. Now, to be honest, a lot of this applies to those less formal assessments, but also to the ultra-formal external exam papers. But just as a side note, given that on exams there are usually multiple questions across a wider span of topics and commands and marks allocated, there is quite a bit more to the exam paper side of things. But honestly, it's just the process that I'm going to share with you now, done multiple times for each and every question. In fact, I am going to be working as a scrutiny panel member in just a few weeks for a future Year 12 external exam paper. Working on a scrutiny panel is always such a valuable experience, and it requires me and any other person on that panel to be involved at such an intricate level that I just love them. Now, obviously, there's very little I can share directly from that experience, but indirectly, I can tell you it certainly impacts and influences the training and coaching that I deliver to students. So for this episode, I am going to focus mainly on those formal assessments that aren't necessarily exams, but it might be something like a research inquiry task, investigation report, a speech, or a presentation. Maybe it's a TED Talk or a podcast script. It might be a book review, a narrative or persuasive writing task. It might be an exposition, a magazine article, or even a design task, something more creative or practical. And maybe it even has an analysis or justification, though, to go with it. Now, believe it or not, all of these tasks go through, or at least should go through, the same stages in development, especially if they are a formal part of senior assessment or a certification. That might be an internal assessment, an IA piece, or a SAC, school assessed coursework. And the reason I'm sharing that process with you today is not just so that you can be nosy, but because if you know this information, then you can better understand how to help and support your teen when they are tackling these types of tasks. Because I was recently coaching one of our next level students on deciding what to do his society and culture personal interest project on. And given that students can choose pretty much anything as their topic, he was understandably feeling a little bit lost, or probably overwhelmed is a better word for it, by just trying to choose something suitable. And there was quite a bit of pressure because this particular assessment counts for a huge 40% of students' final HSC mark for that subject. So picking the right topic is a critical first step to making sure that the rest of the project is smooth and successful. I know a lot of times students are told when there is any kind of choice to choose a topic that interests them or that they have some personal experience with. Now, if you'd like more advice on how to pick a great topic for an open task, then definitely go back and check out episode 60 of this podcast. There's even a free resource download that your team can use to help them map out and strategize what that choice will be. But the idea of choosing something that has some element of personal interest especially makes sense for a PIP, a personal interest project, right? Well, actually, not so much, I'm afraid, because personal interest is absolutely fine when you are looking up or finding out things in your own time for your own pleasure because it's something you enjoy. That is absolutely fine. But when it comes to assessment, just having something that you are interested in is not the criteria that I would recommend starting with. So this student and I spent the whole coaching session not talking about what interests them, but reverse engineering the whole discussion and decision-making process and coming at it from what the assessment is actually for, what it wants them to show and do, and why. So in other words, we were strategically choosing a topic that will tick all of those elements and allow them to operate or produce at a high level within each of them. So that this way they are not limiting themselves in terms of how high they can achieve in the assessment, and they'll be making their life not easy, because these big inquiry tasks are never going to be easy, but certainly as smooth and stress-free, and therefore enjoyable along the way as possible. And remember, we started out thinking about picking a topic that we would enjoy, right? So here's where this ties together. When you understand what has gone into creating the task by whoever is going to be marking it, then you will have a much better idea of how to successfully complete the task, even if there's not any choice in the topic or the direction to go. Most students, totally understandably, me included throughout my high school, college, and university days, would simply tackle an assignment by looking at what I have to do. I didn't think about what do they actually want from me and why. So for example, why am I writing a persuasive speech about, let's say, gender inequality? Is it because the teacher or assessor wants me to show that I understand the issue of gender inequality? Perhaps that's in sport for PE, or in movies for media studies, or maybe in employment for law or legal studies. Or is it that they want me to show my persuasive language techniques for English, and they're actually not that interested in the facts of the issue itself at all? Do you see how different those things could be? Same topic, totally different purpose of the task. Very different angle to be taken, or elements to focus on when tackling that task. So consider how differently your teen would tackle whatever task it might be that they are facing right now if they truly knew those things, or had me sharing and breaking down the exact focus points for their exact task with them on a coaching call. So here is the first thing that happens when an assessment is developed. And I say all of this as someone who has been a head of department who writes the assessments for that department, a coursework moderator for exam boards, a current scrutiny panel member for senior external exams, and a previous writing panel member for external final examinations also. First of all, we look at what subject content needs to be assessed. That means we look at the curriculum content or the course syllabus and exactly what elements need to be or could be or essentially need to be tested in this assessment task. Then we come up with ideas on what type or genre of task could do that. Now, sometimes there might be guidelines on what type of format it should take, like is it to be a written piece or should it be more practical? And often we will also need to take into account the length or the size of a task, not just in terms of word count, but also in terms of what is required to go into it or will be part of it in order to produce the final response. And what will that be like time-wise as well? So a format and type of assessment will eventually be decided upon, sometimes quickly, and sometimes after a lot of debate. And then the very juicy part begins. Just deciding what the task will be is not the juicy part. All the details are put into place and mapped to exactly what syllabus dot points are being assessed, exactly what commands are being required or used, exactly what is going to be required of the student, and what does the student actually need to produce and submit. And are there any steps along the way that might also need to be submitted, either as evidence or as part of the whole process? And this goes back and forth then as each little decision is made with, like I said, mapping back to the syllabus or curriculum content to ensure that everything aligns so that nothing that's required to be assessed is missed, but also so that nothing is being included or required that shouldn't be. And that includes only requiring reasonable personal or background knowledge. So an example of that might be that in a maths paper, say for the topic of probability, students would reasonably be expected to know that there are 26 letters of the alphabet, or 6 sides on a die, or 52 cards in a deck. Any additional information must be included in the task or on the paper as context or supplementary information, or it actually needs to be taken out of the task so it is no longer required. Now, the wording of the task or the question is then refined so that it is as clear as possible, making sure there's no important information that might be left out or left down to presumption. And wording is made as succinct as possible rather than being overly wordy or in any way confusing. Then we move to the all-important marking guide. So the success criteria, the mark scheme, whatever your teen's exam board or country or state calls it, they are all the same thing. They are what your teen's work is being judged against. And this involves a really rigorous process of deciding what content or levels of response get what marks. So remember, for large assessment tasks, it's not about getting a mark for this or a mark for that. It's about band descriptors or levels of response. And honestly, these can, even to me, sometimes be a little bit vague. As you can imagine, I like to make any that I write as specific as possible, but that isn't always the way that these things work, let's say. I have seen criteria that simply vary by one word at each level or each band of descriptions, like basic analysis of whatever it is, to detailed analysis, to sophisticated analysis. And if I had my way, these would be much more detailed and specific because I know how tricky it can be to meet these sorts of descriptors when students don't know exactly what they are requiring or in what way. Which is why a fair bit of my coaching work with students is digging into these descriptors and figuring out what exactly does that mean or look like or include. What makes something sophisticated rather than just appropriate? What is the marker specifically looking for in order to make that decision? Because it's not just an overall feeling that the marker gets, or at least it certainly shouldn't be. This is why it's critical that your teen understands what the mark scheme descriptors or success criteria actually involve and require for each and every task. So what does sophisticated analysis mean for a science report? And what does sophisticated analysis mean for a Shakespeare play? Quick heads up, I ran a big next level training event on exactly this because I know this can feel so puzzling to students. It's called How to Hit the Top Criteria in Extended Responses, and we got deep into the worded descriptors of a variety of assessments for all different exam boards and dug into exactly what they mean and require. We used exemplar answers to see what does and doesn't hit them and why, because I want students to be able to figure this out for themselves. So if your teen is a current next level member, they have the full recording and workbook for this in their next level membership. And every future next level member will also get it included with their membership as well. Because knowing what each descriptor actually looks like and contains and does at each level is critical to your teen feeling confident and being competent in delivering these things. Actually, this reminds me of something else that comes into that earlier development stage, and that is making the task accessible to a variety of abilities and levels. It needs to be accessible and doable by students of all abilities, from an F grade to an A+ or an A star. If it doesn't have that span of responses possible to be produced, then it needs to be tweaked or perhaps totally rethought. And finally, the task is then critically reviewed. So for an official exam board, assessment or piece of coursework or an exam paper, this means it goes to a scrutiny panel or official reviewer. And that person or small group of people will review every aspect of that paper or assessment or task in detail. And when I say detail, I mean detail. When I work on scrutiny panels, we spend at least 1, sometimes 2 full days just reviewing one exam paper and mark scheme. We'll be considering the wording of the question, any adjustments that might need to be made in how marks are allocated, the clarity of the resources provided, and the desired outcomes that are being expected are all dissected and discussed in detail. And I have never seen a task or a paper left exactly as it is, including ones that I have written. That review process is so important to get outside eyes and viewpoints and have someone who isn't in it, writing it, to see it through the eyes of the student. Just like I want your teen to see things through the eyes of the examiner or the teacher marking their paper, we as the teachers or examiners need to be able to see things through the eyes of the student to ensure it's accessible to them. So, what does all of this mean for your teen? Well, if they consider not just what the task is asking them to do, but instead consider how it is the vehicle, that task or the thing they're producing is the vehicle to have them show or demonstrate something, then they'll be able to devise a much more strategic plan of action. If they focus on what knowledge, understanding, or skills they are proving to the marker in this task, and not just focusing on what are they producing, so they think about showing the marker what they can do in terms of what the marker wants them to show, then they will be more likely to include and pay more attention to the things that are actually going to earn them marks or credit. So I hope that little behind the scenes is helpful. I hope it gives you and your teen a different and super useful perspective next time they're getting stuck into a new assignment, and enables them to tackle and complete it with a lot more confidence and a lot less stress or potential confusion, and achieve a successful outcome at the end of it. Have a wonderful rest of your week, and I'll catch you back here next week. Bye. If you're ready to have your teen achieve their best possible results with less stress, then I want to invite you to enroll them in the 10-week Grade Transformation Program, where they're going to learn the key concepts, skills, and strategies to catapult their performance in assessments and exams. It's risk-free. They either achieve bigger and better results with a whole lot more confidence in 10 weeks, or we refund you in full. Just head over to www.rocksolidstudy.com/program, and I'll see you there.